How you doing this
I
morning?
am doing well. Yeah, and I'm glad that Antranig is here because there's been so many times when he's been up at 2 in the morning. I'm like, if anyone has earned a 5 p.m. local time Twitter space, it's Antranig. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
I don't know why my mind turned here, but I was thinking of bloopers recently. And do you remember the Twitter space we had where like I leaned on the keyboard and the recording had like 3 minutes of booping? Anyway.
It's fair. This is fair. This is actual justice. What time is it there?
there's Christian.
9. It's very civil here. Yes. No. It's a reasonable time for us to be.
It is a
Wow,
It
nice.
is a reasonable time. I did think that like at some point we actually should we've not done a space on time zones actually, and not on the.
Wait.
I know.
whoa,
Okay, I know exactly where you're going right now, and it's not what I. Okay, fine. We need to do 2 Twitter spaces on time zones. One on what you want to do, which is the time zone, the time zone database.
No. I think we literally did a Twitter space on time zones.
Oh, that's why you were interrupting me because you felt that that we've already done this.
Like, yeah.
No, we did it on
I think,
time. And then we brought time zones. No. So I don't mean like the nerdy parts of time zones, although all that too. I mean actually more like the human side of working with people across these big offsets because that's not going away, right? I mean that.
Okay. Yeah, totally makes sense. I was like, is this deja vu? Did I dream this whole episode? Because we did the train stations in 1911, and I think
Right, we did. No. So what I mean more is the challenges of dealing because I mean, for example, a 12-hour offset I think is unworkable. I've never seen it work.
Yeah, I mean, which makes some of this like teams that are split between North America and India, I think, extremely challenging.
Really challenging, and it's actually something that makes it something that when Ed Jordan had this book, The Decline and Fall of the American Programmer, which I think we've I've mentioned once or twice around here, but absolutely terrible book. But they written in the 90s about how all of the software engineering was going to be in India, and it doesn't deal with time zone at all. And it was my first time dealing with it just at any 12-hour offset. It doesn't have to be between the US and India, but a 12-hour offset is just absolutely brutal because it means that, I mean, somebody is absolutely off hours in that conversation. Like you're not both on, there is no 12-hour offset in which you're both kind of, it's like what, 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. maybe, I don't know, but it's brutal.
Yeah, at my brother's company, where he is the VP of Eng, they are spinning up a bunch more folks in India, and he says the way they do it is pretty inhumane. They ask the folks in India to stay up until 11 for the all hands at.
So I would actually probably go one step further. I would actually ask them to work nights. I mean, which is also brutal, but it's like actually if you work, people do work nights, right? That is something that people do. People do work third shifts and so on. So
yeah, but as you say,
brutal,
like tough for.
So Christian, I'm trying to add you I keep trying to add you as a speaker, and I'm not sure what. Is Christian not on the mobile app? I thought.
Yeah, Christian,
you've got to be on the phone. And sorry, if you're not on the phone, it won't let you speak, and I don't think it will tell you anything. I just think we can't turn you into a speaker. It won't tell us, and so. But so I was in. First of all, it's great to have our European friends with us. I definitely got a full taste of this when I was out, and actually this is a good kind of entree into this topic at the Open Source Firmware Conference just a couple weeks ago, and working out of Europe, being in Sweden and trying to work with folks on U.S. Pacific is it's hard. I ended up getting a lot less sleep, honestly.
Oh, so I spent a month in Prague when I was in the Solaris kernel group.
Right.
To bring up that office. And it was great because during the day I could get all this work done. No one was sort of asking for my attention. Then I would stay up until 3 a.m. watching baseball on MLB TV and like responding to contemporaneous emails.
Yeah, and I think that like it is. You do have when you got that kind of there is like just enough overlap where you can kind of almost plan your day and get some time. All right, Christian's back. Let's see if and Christian I think is a speaker. Hey, you're
Yeah,
here.
all
Very
right.
good.
All right, yeah, I was indeed on the
I'm so
desktop
sorry.
apparently, so I thought that just works.
No, that's a very reasonable. I know. If Musk announces that he is going to allow Twitter Spaces to operate from the desktop, and also that he is no longer going to allow HPE GreenLake to run ads, my feelings about this whole thing are going to become a lot more complicated. But I'm glad you're here. So, Christian, I wanted to maybe pick up with the open source firmware conference because Adam, I don't think you've not gotten a chance to go to one of these yet.
No, never. The legends that you tell sound amazing, but no, I haven't been.
Actually, I wonder if we could get into the origin of that a little bit because I think the first OSFC was in 2018. Is that right, Christian? I was not there, but is that the first OSFC?
I think Philip can actually add more because he's the original founder of that conference, and he can probably give some more insights on that.
Yeah, we can hear you, Philip.
By the way. Oh, okay, great. That's good. Yeah, so when did it start? So I think it was like 2000. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. It was 2017 or 16. I'm not sure. That was the first OSFC we did. That was in Erlangen, and so the OSFC basically came out of the idea from the Coreboot conference. So there's the Coreboot project, and I was like a long time part of that, and also of the Coreboot as a Coreboot developer and so on. And so we had the like European and American Coreboot conferences. But the problem was like we could never meet with the UEFI guys and with other people in this firmware world. And so we decided to basically start something which is more broader, let's say for the public more, and you have more different topics you cover instead of just talking about Coreboot. And so that's where the open source firmware conference came from. And yeah, that's how it went like with the conference. And then later on, we started after the conference, we started to think more about how we can set up a foundation as well. And that's where we ended up with Open Source Firmware Foundation.
Yeah.
So first of all,
that's great. So you said the first one was in 2017?
2018. Okay, 2018, I think.
2018.
Yeah,
somehow there.
That was long in Erlangen, basically in Germany,
and then you moved to the US. And then were you, because I mean, and OSFC 2019, which was the last time we met in person until OSFC 2022. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I was delighted. It was a great conference. As Adam says, I have apparently become insufferable talking about the legend of OSFC 2019. But because it was pulling in so many different folks, it felt like a really old school conference, very not just collegial, but very. It was one of these old school conferences in that you have this kind of niche interest that you think no one else shares. And then all of a sudden you're in a room with 200 or 300 people that care about this really obscure thing, which felt really neat. Were you surprised? Because I mean, OSFC 2018, it looks like it was another great agenda. I had not heard of it when it was originally launched. Were you surprised about the level of interest, the scope of interest?
For 2019, we were a bit surprised that so many people are coming. I mean, we did it together with Google and Facebook in their offices. And for obvious reasons, like, I don't know, 30%, 40% of the people actually came from Google or Facebook, right? So they just dropped in more or less because they had interest in firmware and just came by. So that was pretty huge. And in 2019, I think there were 350 people around, which is for firmware, that's quite a lot, right? That's
it is Woodstock, and it was also. I mean, I think that's a good analogy. Even though again, Adam's rolling his eyes even more, be like, "Look, I didn't go to this thing, and I wish I had." Okay, so just like knock it off, everybody.
That's right. I've seen the pictures. Everyone was like nude on the wall. I got it. Body paint everywhere.
Yeah, but the density was also really high. I mean, this is not like a this is not something you're going to because, it's not a KubeCon or whatever. This is not a Linux Foundation conference, some, massive kind of undertaking. Like, people are there because they're interested in the topic. And so the density I thought was really high. And I loved, like, you did a hackathon after OSFC 2019, which was tons of fun.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is to keep it very developer centric. So that's like our real focus. So that we don't want to like huge product announcements or whatsoever, but rather than really, keep it to the core and keep it to what the people are interested in. I hacked on this and that, and I mean, you see the talks, right? Like some of these talks really start that, yeah, I know it's hacky and I know it's kind of crap what I did, but it kind of worked in the end. So that's nice. And you just share that. So that was great. And the hackathon afterwards, I mean, we do that in the office, like where we're coming, like the company that we work for, we do that as well, right? Sometimes we just sit together and hack on things. So we have a Friday off where we can hack on projects, and we just love to do that in our free time. So why not bring that into a conference where people, like-minded people, are around and probably also want to do that? And I think that was a great thing.
And Christian, have you seen industry participation over time? Both attendees. I know that they're making product announcements, but folks from representing companies tuning in.
So, I mean, obviously there are a couple of people from companies, right? So.
Pardon me. I guess I mean like maybe offenders when it comes to non-open firmware.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not yet. So
Not yet.
The funny part is also the hackathon ideas basically comes from the German hackerspace community. So I was part of 15 years of a hackerspace. So they use it also for the hacker. So for the biggest hacker conference worldwide, the Chaos Communication Congress. And so they have also everywhere hackathons about different topics. So I think it's quite famous German idea to sit together and hack on things. So it's also deeply rooted in the companies and in the hacker culture as well.
Actually, in 2019, before the OSFC, we also did a small hackathon in Bochum in our hackerspace, right? So in that local hackerspace,
yeah.
And that was really great. But that was really different, really. So that you have to imagine this like a room with 25, 30 people from all over the globe. So I don't know, David Hendricks from the US came in, right? A couple of people from Facebook, from Google, from the Netherlands, like really a lot of people for 4 days just hacking on firmware. That was great. And the hackerspace is right underneath a methadone clinic. Right? So, like, the whole setup really is, it looks like you could imagine a hackerspace, right? Like an old couches, in that one corner, and like LED panels on the walls, and you can play some games here and there. And there was one guy really dressed up in a suit because he thought it's like a serious event, I guess, right? So he came in with a suit, right, and has like a small suitcase where he has his laptop, and came Ryan looked around, was like, okay, and he completely was kind of lost. They was like, okay, what's going on here? Am I right here, or what's going on? And that was like pure fun, actually. And next day he came with shorts and t-shirts and just started hacking on stuff. So that was great to see. And I think this is like what we do and what we love to do. And why not bring that also?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I think it's interesting because you also get this amalgamation of a lot. I mean, you obviously have a bunch of big companies there that have, and you've done an excellent job of pulling in, because you want to have, the HPEs there, and you want to have I don't know that we've had any AMI speakers from AMI, but you've had an Intel presence and an AMD presence, and certainly an Amazon and Google and Meta presence. But then you, at the same time, you have folks that are there because that are individuals that are either students or they're hackers that are just interested in it. And you get this, I think, interesting amalgamation of folks. Actually, I was with at least one person that was at OSFC. An American was at OSFC in Sweden 2022. He's like, yeah, I'm actually here because you guys were talking about it so much on the metal. I really wanted to. I'm like, oh wow, all right. This is, I hope. But he had a great conference. It was fun.
So nice sales there, basically, that you're doing for us.
Oh, well, and I think that honestly, I don't. I mean, I feel that I'm just expressing what's going on. I feel that there's a real grassroots movement. And I feel that, I mean, it feels, for so long in my career, and I mean, you must have felt the same. Adam, I know you felt the same for sure, where it just felt like firmware was going to just stay proprietary. It just did not feel like it was on a trajectory to be opened. There was, I mean, I remember a particularly low moment talking to Intel in 2012, and one of our current colleagues, Keith Lasowski, was there with Robert Stocky. Keith and I were talking to the Intel rep, talking about and being just emphatic that we absolutely needed open firmware. And the classic Intel, in that the engineers in the room didn't disagree with us. Like, no, those are all really good points, but it just doesn't feel like it's going to happen. And we're like, it doesn't feel like it's going to happen. And like, they were not, I mean, they were supportive of it in the abstract, but I think all of us in the room felt like this is just not going to happen. It's not on a trajectory to happen. And it feels like, that was only 10 years ago. And it feels like there's a lot of momentum. Am I delusional, or have things shifted in the last 10 years?
So I can probably answer that question. So I'm not that long there as Ron Minnick, who's the founder of Coreboot project, or Stefan Reinauer, which are both like basically founded everything and started with open source firmware in 1999. But in general, it's always an up and down. So it was always a fight with SOC vendors and also with OEMs to succeed what we plan to do. And so it was like I would say in around 2000, it was the quite easy thing, because they still started early and there was not so much firmware out there. So, I mean, the overall firmware growth on a chip level is like from the 2000, from, I would say, 256 kilobytes, or probably we already had 1 megabyte, but I'm not sure. I would probably say less than that of firmware on a SPI flash, and nowadays it's 32 to 256 megabytes. So the firmware growth was not not a lot, and so a lot of vendors, they still made it possible that you can launch your own firmware on the devices without any security restrictions. And so you could basically do your own thing, right? So as long as you know what you're doing there, you probably can write your own firmware and launch it. And so it was easy. And then in 2000, I think 12 or something like that, they got like security technologies like BootGuard from Intel and some other technologies introduced for security reasons. But the thing is, it made it harder for individuals to work with the topic. And so it slowed down a bit, and then it just started to grow again, I think around 2016 or 17, not sure, but around that time it got speed up. And so it was also finally people got awareness about the topic of firmware and development in general, and also firmware security. So that was quite important, and security was one of the major points for a lot of companies. Transparency control as well. And so it somehow started up, and now we are on a good way, I would say, to achieve the goal with open source firmware. It's still a fight. So it always goes down and up and down and up, depending on which kind of SOC vendor is trying to move into the right direction. But I think with Five and ARM and other SOC vendors being more open, it's a clear shift that we see in the future. So
So that's a good point too, that it was actually more open at one point, and then it actually became more proprietary. And that 2012 moment may have been actually, that's interesting I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that may have been a real low point in terms of kind of maximally proprietary firmware, or kind of entering this maximally proprietary era. And you talk about the security for sure. I think also there's security was both prompting these things to become more proprietary, security through obscurity. I think for me, a big issue is just the pace of platform enablement. And I mean, one of the things that we've talked about before, but man, we're on the front lines of, is how much more complicated these SoCs are. And, the end of Dennard scaling and in 2007, and what that meant in terms of pulling more cores on die. And then if you pull more cores on die, well, now you have to have this other software that actually manages those cores. And those cores, those management cores are completely opaque right now. The PSP on AMD, the SMU on AMD are all completely opaque. The ME on Intel is completely opaque. And I think it's really important that we the microprocessor now is this hybrid of software and hardware, and that software component, it's not just microcode, and that software component remains proprietary, and we've really got to open that up because it's impeding our platform enablement. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I also think that it actually really got more momentum within the last couple of years, right? So I'm in that space since like 4 or 5 years now, and so probably don't have like the huge view back basically on how it was like 15 years ago. However, in the last 5 years, you really feel that momentum basically. Like a lot of people, a lot of companies actually want to move to open source Firmware. Exactly what you said, Brian. To enable their platforms faster, to be able to debug their own platforms, like what's going wrong and what's not, right? Because the reality is that if you cannot debug it anymore for whatever reason, you just have to send the platform to Intel and say, fix it for me because I cannot do it anymore, or to any other SoC because you cannot look into the code anymore. And that's like a real big issue that you send out your platforms for a couple of weeks, right? This SoC vendor starts debugging the whole thing, sends it back to you. That kind of delays the whole process by weeks or months, basically. And we see that that a lot of companies really go into that route. Hyperscalers, but also like medium-sized industry companies that they really want to have control over how they can enable their platform and how they can debug their platform and how they can maintain it in the end. And that's a huge thing.
So do you think that the Bloomberg Supermicro story helped accelerate this at all? Because you recall the story, and Adam, you read the story, remember, in 2018. Yeah.
Yes.
And I wonder if that story, which is seems to be false, has never been verified, but I think could have been true. I think there was applause. Trammell Hudson has got have you seen Trammell's talk on this, Adam? Oh no, my God, it's so good. So Trammell Hudson, who is delightful, and have you met Trammell? You spent time with him?
No, I think I just knew him through the On the Metal episode, right?
Trammell's so great. And it actually, a highlight for me for OSC 2022 was being able to hang out with Trammell in Sweden. And you use Trammell's firmware, I think, right?
That's right. The Magic Lantern.
Right.
Yeah. It's awesome. I mean, firmware on the camera. Also, huge respect for the guy because he not only made this amazing thing, he also let it go. And I feel like I'm often 0 for 2 on that. But I think both of those are incredible skills, right? To make something beautiful and really hand it off to the community is extremely impressive.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the way he actually, that's like his preferred mode of operating is like, I like to kind of go into this kind of new territory, open things up, and then hand it off. And I like to find people that I can hand it off to. And the Magic Lantern, which is the firmware on the Canon the DSLRs, which the guts. I do not have the courage to put my own firmware on something that I have paid too much money for, on like an SLR or like a car. Like I mean, the degree to which I've injured myself just at Oxide. I mean, I would absolutely injure myself putting my own firmware on a car. I would, and I've got total admiration for the folks that are doing that. But so Trammell has this great talk called "Mod Chips of the State," where he shows. Basically, he's like, could I create something that is this small and could actually meaningfully distort the system? And it's pretty interesting and shows that this could be done. I think, and Christian Philip would love your take on this. I think this is one of those wake up moments. I think there are a couple of wake up moments for the industry. I think that was a wake up moment, and I think Spectre and Meltdown were wake up moments. I mean, and I think that those were where you had people talking about some of these security issues that were the potential at the lowest layers of the stack, and then all of a sudden you had Spectre and Meltdown in the same year, 2018, that all of a sudden opened people's eyes. Do you think were those things? What do you think about those things that serving as kind of accelerants?
Yeah, I totally think that is true, right? So these moments that you described there is really something that the people really see now, that you can really do harm in the system. That's really a security issue, right? And we always get the same argument on UFI rootkits, for example, as well, right? So it's the same story always, that you say, but there are rootkits out there, and like, yeah, but no one hardly abuses them or uses them at all, and these kind of things. But if these story happen, like the Bloomberg story with Supermicro, people are really afraid of, oh goddamn, there's some blind spot in my computer that I don't see, or on my servers that I don't see, that can really kind of yeah, attack or do harm to the whole system. And that's
do you think that
But
kind of broader awareness accelerated the desire for open firmware?
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, firmware per se is like a I mean, how many people know what firmware is, right? And what's firmware about, and what's actually happening down there in the stack somewhere, right? You just don't care. I mean, Philip knows these stories, but even like data center operators or companies that run data centers really don't know what's going on in their lower stacks of the platform, right? What does the firmware do? Do I really care about it? Not really, right? And these kind of stories that get a lot of attention, I think they wake people up a little bit and say, okay, probably I should take care of this, and probably I should like at least check what's going on my systems, and how can I improve here and there, maybe.
Well, the fact that that is
And
effectively impossible to even enumerate all of the cores on a system. Certainly, the number of days that we have had at Oxide since discovering our last hidden core, I think now stands at like, maybe it's like 12 or something like that. But it feels like we are constantly, and I don't know that we could actually. In fact, I know that we couldn't, without actually decapping every single component that we've got. There are absolutely compute elements and therefore firmware that we do not see because they are implementation details of components that we use.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
Go ahead, Phil.
yeah, sorry. So I mean, even the CPU, so the central processing unit nowadays has its own firmware for power management and other stuff. So it contains like cryptographic keys. So I would say overall, it's like you're having components in components in components, and so it's getting even more complicated. And so, as I said, like 256 megabytes of firmware you have normally on a modern server board. So that includes BMC, BIOS, Southbridge firmware, additional probably option ROMs through PCI Express, and also all other things like Super IO controller and whatever. So even TPM firmware for security chips. So it's a real it's growing more and more, and so the bus is getting faster and faster, and that's the main reason why we have this explosion, right? So and this future will bring even more firmware.
Yes,
I'm quite sure
absolutely.
of it.
Yep.
Even more integrated stuff, and everything moving in system on chip. So SOC, basically system on chip, means move everything into one chip, and we're getting more and more there. And I think you probably not only have one, but you have like one which is really powerful with a lot of firmware components in it and subcomponents. And so yeah, that will be in the future will be a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we are, and especially as you look at these cores are so small. You can now synthesize a core, be it we've got a Z80 derivative in the, I don't know, Adam, you saw this TV80? Did you see which is this Zilog derivative, but it is an open source core that is easily synthesizable. So it actually, it shows up in more places than people might realize. And of course, the 8051 is practically ubiquitous. But the actually, I think I'm very excited about the rise of the Cortex M0 Plus line, which is a super small microprocessor from a number of gates perspective and from a physical perspective, but it's actually like a real 32-bit microprocessor as opposed to this kind of 8-bit nonsense. So you can actually run a real operating system on there. So I'm actually excited about this trend. So to your point about like we're going to see more of it, like I think we are going to see more of it, and I think that's a good thing. But it needs to be open, and that's where like that's I think kind of where we are in terms of like cracking this stuff open. So OSFC has been great. And I, again, thank you both for, and everyone that's been involved in that effort, because it's been such a great conference. At what point did you start thinking about a foundation? Because this is kind of why we're doing this now, is because you're getting the Open Source Firmware Foundation off the ground. When did that start occurring to you?
I think that started somewhere in 2020. Philip and I kind of started talking about it. That idea was kind of floating around already, that we need some umbrella, some neutral ground where we can bind the community together, because that's also what OSFC is for, right? Getting the community together at one place, let them talk to each other, present your work and these kind of things. And that idea that we have to have these like a playground where we can bring everyone together, that came up around 2020. But it sounded kind of crazy at first. Say, okay, let's start a foundation. How do we do that? I don't know. Who should we talk to? I really don't know. Right? And so it took a little bit of time until we really got started on that.
Well, and open source foundations are, I mean, it's like almost like open source licensing, in that it's like, feels like any conversation about open source is destined to go into kind of the foundation vessel. And Adam, have you, I know I've definitely have suffered this quite a bit. Have you dealt with the Linux Foundation?
Only a teeny bit. Actually, one of their sort of like umbrella, smaller vassal organizations that was trying to shake me down for some exorbitant sum for some very nominal gain on our part.
That's it. That feels like the story of the Linux Foundation.
That's it.
That's the summary. I mean, you could be talking about any one of their. I mean, you're going to have to be way more specific to have any idea of. So do you want to describe that a little bit? Because I think that is, and Christian, I imagine you and Philip were kind of like looking as like, boy, do we go to the Linux Foundation? That's something that has been, I mean, obviously I've got strong feelings about, but I mean, what were they trying to shake you down for exactly?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. That was never really clear. So, I was talking to, like, again, one of these smaller organizations that was under the umbrella. They had sort of divided that organization into a technical steering committee and sort of a marketing organization or whatever. And the admission fee was for this marketing organization that basically did nothing, allowed us to use the logo that we had no interest in using. And then all of the technical stuff was off to the side and divorced from it. And I think actually the breaking point for me is when I got fed up and I looked up in their 501c6 disclosures how much the project manager I was talking to made.
Yeah.
And when he was, making $750,000 a year, I was just like, you know what, we don't need to talk anymore. It's fine. I'll just go participate in the open and not use your.
Yeah, and they got very upset with me. I tweeted out their 990, which is the federal form that you need to file for when you're a 501c6, which is not a 501c3. 501c6 is is an industry consortium, effectively, not a charitable organization.
That's right. You can't write off your donations to the Linux Foundation.
You can't write off your donations to the Linux Foundation. And so, one thing that actually I found really disingenuous about the Linux Foundation is that they had this donations page, and you would have these, like your son, who's like, I'm enjoying using Linux, and I want to support it. So, I'm going to take some of the money I made from, mowing lawns, and I'm going to give it to the Linux Foundation. And you're like, no, give it to literally any other corporation. I mean,
or you know what? Keep it. Like, no joke. That is a more noble,
or blow it.
Like, thing to do.
Blow it on something.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, what is the dumbest way you can think of? You 15-year-old can think of something.
You're right. The fact that they have that donation page, to suggest that it's Bernie Sanders getting $13.90 per donor, as opposed to shaking down corporations for hundreds of thousands of dollars, is so disingenuous.
It is very disingenuous, and I think there are aspects of the Linux Foundation that I definitely admire, and there are things that they do that are helpful, but they have created this extremely heavyweight organization that I feel is looking after itself first, just bluntly. It's just like the actual artifacts are not something that, so I don't know, Philip and Christian, did you consider, I mean, with all that preamble, did you even look at the Linux Foundation, or did you think about that? I mean, I'm glad that obviously was relieved to hear that you'd by the time you and I spoke, you'd already rejected that route. But is that something you looked at?
So probably I would say we also thought about that. I think we discussed it once, but the thing is, like, the Linux Foundation, in my opinion, is for Linux or operating system related stuff. And so it was already out of question to just go with them. Because I already got also experience with the Linux Foundation, so I think it's too big and too diverse, in my opinion. And we wanted a foundation who concentrates more on the needs of the firmware projects. And so that's why we basically set up then the foundation with other reasons as well, like failure safety, because we're currently running the open source firmware conference. But we want to have more companies join that and make that independent from us. So that was one main point. And I think the Linux Foundation is, as you said, quite big. It's hard to work with them. They have probably also their benefits. I completely agree. But I also think you need to be like some kind of superhero project that they really take a lot of work into you, because all other smaller projects they basically left out. So that's my experiences with Linux Foundation. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that the large projects are also very frustrated with the way they just do not run and I mean, there is, and boy, the number of times I was in the room when Kubernetes is like, we're done, we're leaving the Linux Foundation, we're leaving the CNCF, and which, needless to say, they're that would be not in the Linux Foundation's best interest. So they definitely were trying to talk them out of that, but they were the actual people that were running the Kubernetes as a project very, very, very frustrated because they're not getting, I mean, like the things that, I mean, for a software project, like the things that you need are not flashy and they don't involve like gigantic events. I mean that, OSFC is a terrific old school conference, but these huge events that are really vendor oriented are actually not what you need when you're an open source project. Like you actually I could really use some help on documentation or someone to help triage incoming issues. And those are the kind of gritty issues that you really, and when I was on the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, oversight in air quotes, for the CNCF, that was something that really trying to get them to be better about giving grassroots support for open source, because that is, I think, the bit that is really, really missing. And boy, I think that no open source community is more grassroots, I feel, than open source firmware. So I think it's really, really important that you have a foundation that consists of the real practitioners.
Yeah, I think so as well. And as Philip said, like one of the reasoning really was that, I mean, we're planning to move the conference basically over into the foundation, and that's why we wanted to keep it separate, basically, and that we have control over everything, maybe on that part, because it's a pretty I mean, in firmware, it's a pretty big conference, and that's something that we own right now, in terms of, because we're running it, but we want to move that to the community and let go of it, basically, so that if we 9 Elements are not there anymore, the conference still continues. So we have to have like something separated that kind of owns the whole thing there.
Which is great. And I think that, certainly speaking for we at Oxide, we are not just enthusiastic about open source firmware. Obviously, open source firmware is very, very important to us, but very enthusiastic to be among the initial members of the Open Source Firmware Foundation. We're really excited that you're doing this, and we're certainly looking forward to being a part of it. And I think in part because we love the way you're running it, which is very oriented on the artifacts, namely the conference, and the actual supporting these teams.
Yeah, I mean, we're really glad to have you on board. And I think Oxide is one of these companies that have That have kind of the same mindset, at least in terms of open source and how we should do things, than Nine Elements, for example, also has, right? So we share the same spirit there, and I think it's just good that we, like, both companies basically are there within the founding members to really start that and to keep that core spirit basically in the foundation, right? And that we can move.
Well, and the thing that I kind of love about open source firmware from an economic construction is that it is basically you don't have this kind of problem that, Adam, you might have had with this vassal state that you were dealing with in the CNCF, where you got kind of startups that are trying to directly monetize software in the ecosystem. So they have their motives for being involved can become somewhat questionable. We don't really, in firmware, it's like what people are selling is the thing, and the physical thing that the software runs on. I do feel like we didn't actually talk about the definition of firmware is, and I know, Adam, I'm sure you're rolling your eyes right now. But if this is going to turn into another what is software conversation, I got I like no way. But I do feel that firmware necessitates a physical artifact. Can we agree on that?
Yeah,
okay.
That sounds right.
All right.
Yeah, and they're sort of tied together.
I know that I'm kind of inching around the chasm here, so I don't want us to follow it. But I think we can agree that there's a physical artifact, and that physical artifact is normally what is that's not free. People are paying for that, and that means that there's a very clear business model for companies that are we make physical stuff, and as a result, we can actually. I don't sell the software. The software is very important. The software helps enable the physical thing, but we are really incentivized, and certainly at Oxide, we've got, I think, God's own open source business model. Namely, we're incentivized to open it all because we're not really worried about someone creating a rival Oxide rack. I mean, good luck with all that. But and we would love to see the stuff that we've done, low-level platform enablement, with the stuff we've done certainly with Hubris and Humility, and the stuff we've done elsewhere in the stack, be used by other folks would be terrific.
Yeah, let me try this out on Brian, and Christian and Philip too. As we're talking about this, it's so great that this conference and foundation are so grassroots. And Brian, as you say, things like KubeCon or whatever have gone off the rails in terms of that commercialization and every booth trying to sell you something. As much as it'd be great to resist that, I think that would also be a harbinger of success. That is to say, there is, I think, in the future, this kind of dam breaking moment where it goes from default closed to default open.
Yeah.
And as that happens, then these corporate interests will want to participate and will want to show off their wares and will see it as a venue, not just for the creation of these artifacts, but to evangelize them. It'd be sort of bad, but also maybe a good
well, actually, I mean, the nice thing is those corporations are doing that. It's just they're not trying to sell it to the conference goers. You know what I mean? Where it's HPE talking about what they've done on their BMC and getting OpenBMC to work on their ILO effectively, but not actually trying to show that off and not necessarily trying to sell it to you. I think you're right. I think that's going to be an indicator of. Well, actually, let me ask you pose that kind of question to Philip, to you and to Christian. I mean, what do you view as some of the hallmarks of budding success here?
Yeah, probably I can go first. So from my perspective, I think, probably that sounds strange, but I think it shows the success if one of the most proprietary companies working on on closed source firmware, or in general on firmware development, starts doing open source firmware stuff. They're probably not completely committing to it in the right way, but they're already starting to be more open. So what I'm talking about is MI, you probably noticed. So they're trying to get into the open source firmware space. They're still going in the special way of that, right? In the, let's say,
special, yes.
Very special.
Let's call it special way, but it's already a success that they think about it. I mean, before they never thought about it. And I think this is one of the biggest signs that things moving, aside from other companies joining. And also that we got a lot of community growth in the open source firmware communities. So, I mean, nowadays, I think it's I'm not sure how many contributors we have to the Cobol community now, but I think there's around 500 or 700, 800. I'm not sure. So this is also another, let's say, big growth in that area. Yeah. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I totally agree on that. That it's good that these companies try to be more open and try to kind of embrace open source. Yeah, I totally disagree with the way how they do it, or if they do it in general, or if it's just marketing right now, right? So that's a different topic, basically.
Well, and AMI is
How,
AMI is very different from basically everyone else in the industry, in that AMI actually sells proprietary firmware, whereas everyone else actually sells the artifact, the physical thing.
yeah, right. I mean, you have to think about the traditional IBVs. How do they sustain their business model, right? If the business model is building that proprietary artifact and selling it to you via or licensing it to you, right? So like, how do they keep that their business model up and
Yeah.
running with open source? And that's a pretty big thing. And I think this is something that they're wondering about. And I think it's good that they're trying to get into it, but it's not really. I wouldn't say that they're really bought into this right now, and that they're really, they're just dipping into the water a little bit and see what's going on and think and look around there.
Well, and I mean, on the one hand, I'm very sympathetic in that it is very hard to be disrupted by open source. But on the other hand, I hope that and it's great to hear, Phil, that you think that we got some kind of budding participation from AMI. I do think it's important that no company is going to prevent this from happening, and so it's important that they realize this is going to happen. I mean, a big kind of flip is when companies go from "I'm going to prevent this from happening" to, and if this happens, it's an existential threat, to this is going to happen no matter what. And how do I reinvent myself in this world? Because it does necessitate reinvention. It's not, which is really hard. And it may be that the new business model looks really, really different from the old business model, but that's something that has to happen. That's not something that is, you can only hold back the dam on this for so long.
Yeah, it sounds, Brian, like you're drawing strong analogies with the open source revolution we saw, maybe in the aughts or the 2010s or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. And companies, were able to, and, for years, Microsoft spent all of its kind of energy trying to prevent open source from happening. And Microsoft could not prevent open source from happening. And they had to reinvent themselves in light of open source. And they've done actually, honestly, I didn't think, did you think we were ever going to see a Microsoft that's as open as the one we've got right now, Adam?
No, emphatically not. In fact, I was at a conference in maybe 2004, 2005, and I think it was one of the early open source conferences, maybe the first European OSCON or something like that, where Microsoft announced open source licenses, and everyone lost their mind. And I just thought, these are licenses without actually software attached. What are we doing here? Like, why are we clapping? But yeah, to see how they have shifted.
Well, actually, that's actually that dovetails actually with Philip's point in an interesting way, that you're saying that, like, so there was these kind of things that felt very performative, but actually did presage some really fundamental changes at the company. So, when we see some similar things that feel like only gestures from companies like AMI, we should be encouraging of that. Which is not necessarily my first instinct. So,
yeah.
So let me ask you, Christian, how do you feel about? Because one of the challenges that you have, not when you're dealing with the IBVs, which have their own, the independent bias vendors have their own kind of interests, but when you're dealing with component vendors who have firmware components, or have firmware in their components, and they've got bits that need to remain proprietary. You've got these binary blobs, and because I feel like it's hard to be a total purist about this, because if you're a complete purist, we won't get to open source firmware. So what's your thinking on binary blobs?
Oh boy.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
I guess it's a big topic.
Yeah, the thing is this, right? If you're trying to I mean, this is what we're trying. We're trying to change the industry on how we handle firmware right now. I mean, this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to be disruptive to, in the long haul, really change that. As Adam, I think, said pretty good, that open is the default standard basically, and not closed, right? So you have to be very political, right? And you have to understand their needs and their issues and their fear on when they open, like what happens if they open blobs up and these kind of things. And I do understand that that this is like an iterative process that goes over a couple of years until we have maybe not maybe have a full open source firmware running on an x86 system, right? Like with all the bits everywhere with like I don't know, on AMD with PSP and these kind of things. So it's a very long run, and you always have to. Sometimes it's feel that you really have to convince each and every person one by one, right, to really go that route. But I think at some point it kind of falls, and then it all breaks together, and then it goes faster and faster, and we will really be there and have an open system there. So I think it's a long run. I don't understand why we have so many binaries actually in our firmware. I never understood that. But
well, I think that's yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason you got binaries is, and I think in many cases it's not because people are don't believe in the kind of the inherent goodness of opening these things up. It's because the interfaces they represent are in some cases not documented at all. And like there's no documentation describing these interfaces, and there's a sense of like, well, we don't want to open this up because we don't want to be committing to this interface, and we kind of need to get people past that, where it's like, no, you can open this, like making the source code to, I mean, forget the PSP. I mean, PSP 2 would be great, but things like the system management unit on AMD Milan, it's like you opening that up, or the Intel management engine, opening that up actually allows people to get greater confidence in the thing that you make, and allows them to help you understand it, help you, yes, find some vulnerabilities maybe, or find some reliability problems, but that's going to be, that community will ultimately be very net positive. But I think it's hard to get people there when you got these things like, yeah, but this thing isn't documented at all. You've got no way for people to actually meaningfully participate in this or what have you. So as you say, it's a journey for sure. And are you finding that people are that it is gotten easier to make that case to companies?
To SoC vendors, or to in general companies that build components that have firmware?
Actually, are you seeing a difference? That's kind of interesting if you're seeing a difference.
I'm not sure if I see it there, but I don't think that it really got easier in that term. I think the view on open source within, for example, SoC vendors is a totally different one than from the community side, right? So what open source means, and I know if you have the discussion and say, what about if we talk about open source firmware and we have these blobs where there, do we need them all, and can't we get rid of them and take a journey basically, or do that journey and open them up? You always get the same argument that we cannot do it. We already have an open source solution, which is this and that, and it kind of consumes the binary, but it works. We can maintain it and these kind of things. And I really don't think that everyone really got yet the upside of opening up these systems, right? And everything that you just said, that you get all these benefits basically from the community, right? I don't think that it really got into the minds of the people that make the decisions at the SoC vendors there.
This is what I would agree on. So, I mean, it's not about like a SoC vendor as a company. It's about also the development culture of the firmware development in this company. So
that's a good point.
most of the people in there, so not all, but a lot of them, they kept for the last 30 years in a, let's say, they put it into like the closet. and don't let them out, right? So don't let any kind of new software development go through to them. So it's really like the entire firmware development is still based on assembly in C. I mean, so probably some projects now starting to use Rust, but I mean, this is like just early stuff, right? So it's like still like in the old ages of software
Yeah.
development. And so these people have really no background for open source because they're coming from a completely different background, like, and that's why it's for them hard to understand why this is a benefit. And it's also a change of, like, some people like keeping status quo, and so I personally don't like. But they are not so open for change,
If
so it's a really
I
really
may,
hard thing to do. Yeah, sorry.
if I may, I think we have also as customers to voice and to value the work you are all doing on this side. I can share the story we did with HPE when we are buying servers and we are buying for millions of dollars of service. We are putting a bonus on the one which are playing fair with open source.
Yes.
And I think it's a way also to share with them that also it's not only a technical point of view to have open source firmware. Customers and end users want to get this this openness, and we value it. And I can tell that one of the ODM have lost because of open source. They were not able to do it on the platform where we have been selecting, and HPE did it well. There was they open the Gen 11 systems to have OpenBMC as a default. And for us, we said, okay, if you go on this way, you will have a bonus on our evaluation
And
matrix. And I think we have a great responsibility as end customers to value that and to be explicit with our
I,
providers that we want open source firmware.
yes.
I think
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah. I think, yeah,
interesting
exactly. Sorry. Go ahead.
because what you're doing is you're really putting system firmware or it doesn't matter if it's a BMC or host firmware, right? You make it part of your business, right? And you make it part of your business decision. And I think that's a great way to go. And that's actually really I mean, everyone knows how it works, right? They have, like, the SoC vendors have to have a business case at hand, basically why they should drive into that direction. And Erwan, as you said, it's great that you say, okay, we have to kind of put our business basically, or make business decisions based on the technology stack, and that also includes firmware. And that's I think totally the right way to go
Absolutely
there.
the right way to
Yeah,
go.
in a
Yeah.
lot
Sorry.
of in a lot of these domains, you have not that many players and kind of a prisoner's dilemma, where they're all staying proprietary and they all have sort of their mutual shared incentive to stay proprietary. But all it takes is one of them to flip, and then the consumers of those technologies to write that in, as you say, as a requirement for selecting something, or a bonus for selecting
Well,
something.
exactly, and I think that we've all heard it. No customer is asking for this, and I'm sure you heard it too, Val. When people were it's like, well, you want this to be open, but you're the only customer that's asking for this, and I used to believe that. I think many of us believe that, but then you begin to realize, like, no. You may not be hearing this from everybody, but I am definitely not the only customer that wants this. I may be one of the few that's telling you about it. So I do think you got a very, very good point in that it's the consumers of infrastructure, when they begin to use the openness of a platform as a component, and it's not the only component, but it's a component in a purchasing decision. And for those that didn't see it, you've got a great talk at OSFC 2022 on your journey to OpenBMC, away from the proprietary BMCs, with some terrific some terrific / horrifying stories of firmware bugs that you've encountered.
Yeah.
Um,
And I can also share that now I'm using this to enforce open source firmware to other vendors, because I can share that during the OCP summit, we have been visiting many vendors because we have a project incoming, a great one. And we were speaking about all these topics. And I said to them, okay, now you know the rules. They did it. HPE did it. If you don't do it, you have no chance to pass through, because up to now, the open source firmware was a bonus. Now it becomes a requirement because one did it well. And now we are in a position where we can increase the pressure to them because one did it. And want more and more, by the time that more and more companies will get right on this topic, we'll be, as a customer, in a position to enforce open source firmware because one already did it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think I may be a victim of my most recent experiences here on this one, but I was just I was at a conference for a SSD vendor, and the interactions with the SSD vendor really made me feel like SSD firmware may be a long lagging indicator. They had a big session on security that didn't mention open source at all. In fact, intimated that open source firmware would lead to a less secure product, which I sort of made enemies in the room talking about, and insisting that a more secure product was a more open one. And I got the typical vendor feedback of mumble, lawyers, something, right? And not a lot of other customers in the room beating that same drum. Interestingly, though, at talking to other customers who not only consume SSDs but also CPUs, they were really interested in what Oxide was doing and what we were building and how we were building this firmware in the open and booting systems with this holistic insights about its capability. So it's so interesting that they were fascinated by open source firmware on one component and sort of dismissive on the other. And so I think for a lot of these kinds of vendors, it really, or pardon me, customers of these vendors, it really just takes some examples.
Right.
Show me what you can do. Show me that it exists. Show me that I can have this, that this exists and isn't, just a fantasy. And then it won't just be one customer saying it. It won't be just be one customer thinking it, but it takes that demonstration of those capabilities.
Well, and Adam, I'm really glad you mentioned the SSDs because I think that there's another. Philip, you'd mentioned this earlier in terms of seeing more firmware in more places. We now, as you have more and more powerful compute elements, and also like more that they need to go do, you've got very sophisticated firmware in the SSDs that right now is completely proprietary. We've got very sophisticated firmware on the NICs, especially with the rise of smart NICs, to the degree that's going to, you can argue about what degree that's going to happen or not, but we've got more compute elements out by the NICs. That's all proprietary. And then we've got I feel like the one that's really lurking is the GPU, which is becoming increasingly, obviously, very important. And we've got there a single vendor with a complete hammerlock over the entire ecosystem. And that is all proprietary. So we've got a lot of work we need to go do to get to. And I'm glad you were fighting the good fight. And representing Oxide's good name. I'm sure they're like,
yeah, come on. I know
they're like, oh God, the Oxide people. Geez, it's always open firmware this, open firmware the other thing with you people.
You're the only ones asking for it.
Yeah, exactly. But that is, and so Christian, do you? And actually, another point that I want to go back to that I also love that you mentioned is the cultural transformation that you're trying to affect. And I was talking to a vendor that will definitely remain nameless, who's like, no, like we're making good progress because we're using Git. I'm like, you're using what? Using like, oh, do you have a repo on GitHub? And they're like, no, but we're using Git. I'm like, okay, you did that. Sorry. It's great. Congratulations, I guess. But I think.
No, we're living indoors now. No, it's terrific.
Yeah,
you should try it. It's like, no, I have been trying it.
Right.
Yeah, but this is like using Git is I would say the top of the iceberg. So someone from our team, David Hendricks, from Facebook, basically moved once to the OEMs to China, and they told him so the most advanced version control system you could find was Subversion. That was only one vendor, and the rest did like sending emails with zip files of code.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's still the status quo for a lot of things, right? We are also working together on other more micro so more on MCUs, and that's still the status quo that you get zip files with this typical underscore final underscore something dot zip, right? And that's
final draft for right. Oh God!
And that's just still the status quo, basically. And it feels like that this whole software development industry kind of got stuck somewhere, and I don't know why they don't move forward anymore, right? And And I think that's also one of the problems that we need to tackle, and that we actually need to push forward there, because that's really something that is lacking behind. Because this is not possible if you do I don't know, web development, for example, right? It's like a whole different world, and you don't have that you say, okay, I'm sending you my homepage with a zip file.
Well,
So that's just not.
and so this,
Well,
yeah.
I don't know it at least.
Well, and I think this is a very good point, that we don't do this in other domains. And in part, we don't do it in other domains because it's a lot slower. If you were to do, I mean, did you ever use Cold Fusion? Oh
No.
my God. I mean, it's like, but there were proprietary alternatives to the web. Flash, I guess, would be the kind of the proprietary alternative to the web. And those proprietary alternatives, due to the hard work of lots and lots of people, those proprietary alternatives, and
Did we lose Brian, or am I lost?
Yeah, I guess we
No, I
lost
think
him.
we lost him.
Oh dear. Cold Fusion. That's a tough one to pick up on.
I think Musk must have pulled the plug on that. I just didn't like where I was going with that one.
How dare you disparage proprietary web?
Somebody has already leaked the email that I'm forcing everyone to go to Cold Fusion, or they'll be fired by Friday. Sorry, I guess you lost me at Cold Fusion. But there was a proprietary web. You don't do it that way because it's slower. It's faster much faster. Like it is. And Christian, to your point, like we can't even contemplate using proprietary tools for the web because it's so much faster. We all know here in the room that this will be true for that firmware layer as well, that they will go faster if things are open, but they don't view it that way. And that's, I think, part of the argument that we're going to need to show people. Lucas, you got your hand up.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having this, and happy to see it happen during the day as well. Coming back to the firmware blobs, the binary blobs discussion, I wanted to ask a question about that. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but the thing I've always heard is that if they open sourced their binary blobs, that somehow an expert could infer design decisions about the actual underlying hardware, and that would somehow reveal their secret sauce of hardware design. Is there any truth to that? Or
For sure.
Is that hogwash?
Yeah, no, that's not hogwash. I mean, for sure, if you were to open sourcing the Intel management engine would absolutely reveal design decisions that have been made. Open sourcing the PSP, open sourcing any of those binary blobs to make it open would absolutely reveal design decisions. The question is, do those design decisions represent real secret sauce or not? And I personally would say, yeah, the design decisions. But it's like, by the way, that's not the hard part of doing this stuff. I mean, that's like me knowing your design decisions does not allow me to get to a design any faster, really. And it's also really hard to execute. So I don't know, Philip, what do you think?
So basically, I call it hardware API. So I see the hardware as API. It has API interfaces, and you somehow need to configure it to run it properly. And so these blobs are interfacing these interfaces. And so you could say, okay, yeah, but there's probably some magic sauce in it. But the most stuff which has nowadays magic sauce is part of the SOC burned into the chip itself. That means it's not real confidential information, or not so much confidential information anymore. So it's probably 1% left or whatever. From 100%, that means 99% are completely just calling an API. And I mean, yeah, you can figure out design decisions, but I mean, this is with all APIs you have, like REST APIs outside in the web and everywhere else, right? So, I mean, how do you develop against something you don't understand, right? So it's just like completely useless. So in my opinion, it's a hardware API. It should be documented, and it should be it should be possible to write open source firmware for it.
But Lucas, I can tell you that that perception is a very valid one, in that it is something that even the executives at these companies don't necessarily know. They become they get this non-specific angst that if I open this up, a competitor will be able to copy this. And if you're dealing with a something that's like, a GPGPU or an SSD or an SoC. It's like these things are not really like, these are much more complicated than that.
But especially because your competitor, your ostensible competitor who's going to follow this, already has their own mountain of foundation where
Yes.
they diverged in terms of their decision process literally decades ago. So you think they're going to unwind that whole thing to go left instead of right to follow you down this path? I mean, it's just lunacy.
It is absolute lunacy, and I did a talk on corporate open source anti-patterns, and one of the anti-patterns that I describe is this idea that your competitor is going to copy you. It's like your competitor, not only, as you say, Adam, they've got their own mountain of stuff. Also, your competitor thinks you're a jackass.
That's right. Irrespective of their relative market positions, right? They go to all their customers and tell their customers what idiots you are, and
Right.
and then they're going to turn around and copy your technology. Give me a break.
Right, and I think you and I saw that very viscerally when we opened dtrace. The very first thing to be open sourced in Open Solaris in 2005 was dtrace, and we're like, well, it's like, oh, they're going to take this and put this into Linux. And it's like, no, they think we're idiots. It's like, sorry.
No, if anything, right, it increased the NIH.
I think it did increase the NIH, and it forced it to make make weirder arguments, basically.
Also harkening back to those bad old days, though, as we open sourced Solaris, there was a binary blob, wasn't there, Brian? Like there was some pieces of the boot process that like we didn't have IP to, and or something like that. So it was a little complicated even back then.
Okay, so that's actually a really important point, Adam, because this is, I think, even more true, like way more true with this layer of the stack. That the reason you can have a proprietary blob is not just because like we don't want to open it up or it's not documented or what have you. It's because no, we can't. We license this IP from someone else. Our agreement does not allow us to open source. Like that is actually, I think,
it's like we've changed it over time. We've carved it up. That company, in the meantime, has been bought 3 times and chopped into pieces and distributed to the wind. And so even unencumbering ourselves to feel that we were on, stable legal ground, setting aside, the lawyers, fighting open source more generally, but specifically around this, it's really tough.
It's really tough. And that's part of the reason, and Chris, this is the point you were making earlier, that like, when you can't be too absolutist about this, or you won't get anything. You actually need to be. No one likes proprietary blobs, but no one likes binary blobs. But at some level, we want them to be as small as possible and as few as possible. But if we don't accommodate them at all, we won't end up with any open source firmware.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think Stefan Reiner once said that he rather has a couple of binary blobs in the firmware rather than having no firmware or no open source firmware at all on Intel x86 systems, right? So you have to do compromises over and over again. But I mean, it's really not about demanding the maximum kind of thing, but rather than really going the journey together and trying to explain and see, okay, there's also upsides on open source firmware, right? And this is what you can gain of it, right? And this is how we can move forward together faster. And I had a talk on at the OCP Global Summit now on how the platform enablement changes with open source firmware, right? Because right now you have the SoCs and you got like a handful of IBVs who have a very strong connection. And it basically all scales at the IBVs, right? And the IBVs have to enable like all the OEMs and ODMs then in the end, and there it scales. But if you have open source firmware, it scales directly at the SoC, and you get more partners, which are, I call them enablement partners, that you have a group of people which can scale much, much better and can move much, much faster forward and do platform enabling much, much faster, basically, because it's open, right? And we can kind of collaborate on things. So that's how these kind of tiny bits that you have to explain always one by one, so that also the companies really see the upside and want to go that way together with you, rather than just demanding things that will not end up very well in the end.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I can also share.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can also share the way I'm pushing back the secret sauce story when my vendors are trying to go in this field. Usually, what I'm telling them is, I'm buying you hardware and all time I have issue with software, and you are not software vendors, and you are causing me trouble because of you are not doing well the software. And you should use the communities as you're saying, because every time you're trying to do software, you fail. And it's usually pretty efficient. I don't know if it works on when, but usually it works. I mean, they understand this point, and I'm asking them to offload the software to someone who knows how to do it. I'm not trying and tell them not to do it themselves because they always fail. It's a drama.
It's such an interesting one where, in my experience with the SSD vendor recently, was that kind of argument resulted them saying, no, we are software vendors. That they think that if they're just NAND vendors with a controller, then they're in this commodity market. And every hardware vendor wants to resist commoditization to some degree because then they just see their margins slipping away.
Yeah.
So they want to be software vendors, adding software features, mostly that we don't want, but I'm sure that some folks want them.
Yeah, but when we're reporting
Yeah,
issues,
he's
then
right.
the funny story starts. I mean, all time we are reporting issues, and it's always about software, never about hardware. So this is how I'm showing them that on this device you have this and these bugs. I've reported you, and you took this amount of weeks or months to fix it. If it had been open, I would have been in a position probably to help you to reproduce, to add traces, to debug, and then to help you finding the issue. But as you are trying to close source everything, I'm just consuming your stuff, it's broken, and okay, I'm stuck.
Yeah. We're
And
like,
it
hey,
is,
no, we're a software company. Like, yeah, no, I know you're a software company. Your software's broken, so that's why I need you to fix it.
Actually, with companies that we work together, so on like my day-to-day job, we are running that IBV or that open source IBV, and the companies that we work with, they actually already do fix their own bugs, right? So we provide them like open source firmware, have everything upstream integrated, so they can pull the stuff on their own and can build everything on their own. And what they do nowadays is they say, okay, this is not working. I'm just debugging it on my own, and I'm just sending you the link to the patch, basically saying, or just writing us and informing us that they fixed it on their own, right? And that we should take a look at it, and that it goes upstream in the end. But they're already eliminating kind of the need for us, right? In that sense. But it's great to see that they are able to debug some of the issues on their own and move forward on their own and not relying completely on us anymore, right? And that's like the way to go there.
Right. That's the power of open source. We've seen that. Hamza Jalal, you've been trying to get in here. Oh, you still there? Oh, maybe not. So one peril of doing this early in the morning is we end up with hard stops here. I mean, we got hard stops from Adam's toddler normally when we do it in the evening, and hard to know actually the toddler. Oh, actually no longer really a toddler. Do you still call him a toddler?
No, he's like a real boy now.
It's like Pinocchio. I feel like, I mean, he has always been man-sized, so I feel like that.
Yes. No, we do get a bunch of your 8-year-old is kind of immature. It's like, no, my 5-year-old is kind of large. Yes,
That's right. But I assume that you don't have a meeting with him at 10:30 in the Pacific.
No. God, I hope not.
Right, exactly. Your one-on-one with him is this evening, but I am going to have a hard stop here in a couple of minutes. So, let's see if we can get him back in here. Hamza Jalal, are you there? Is the caller there? No, maybe not. So, Christian, if folks want to get involved, if folks want to get involved in the Open Source Firmware Foundation, or if they want to kind of point their vendors, their partners in this direction, saying, hey, this is something that we're going to, because, Erwin, another thing that you could be looking at is like, hey, another thing on our scorecard is going to be, are you participating in the Open Source Firmware Foundation? I know, yep, you told me that it's going to be a long journey to open source this stuff, and you're only going to announce the licenses at the next conference or what have you, but can you be a part of the foundation? How should they get involved?
So we have a homepage. It has a catchy name, open source firmware.foundation. So it's a pretty long name, but I think you can also use osfw.foundation to get there. And there you can basically get all the information that you need. You can sign up to the newsletter if you want to, or you can join the Slack channels, or you can just drop us an email. I think that's how you can reach us there. And then you can get involved, right? So if you want to be a member, if you want to start one of the work streams that we have, so we have a couple of work streams starting right now, which is kind of a focus group on a specific topic. So we have one about like silicon interfaces, like how do I interface a blob? Should we kind of write a standard around that so that not every SoC kind of does their own thing. We have some payload handoff right now going on. So there's a lot of things that we have. I think Philip is running a firmware security work stream. So if you want to get involved there, feel free to drop us an email or join on Slack basically and just message us. What we also always looking for is people to help like running the whole thing, right? It's kind of a beast. There's a lot of like just organizational stuff to do every now and then. So if people want to get involved in there, that's also just fine, right? So it's not only technical, but also a little bit organizational stuff around it where we can always need a hand, basically.
Well, that is great, and a lot of good starting points for people. You know, I've gotten, I think I mentioned this last time, but I've had a lot of young people, younger technologists that are earlier in their careers, who I know have been either joining us on the space or catching the recordings. And if you're a technologist earlier in your career and you're looking back, it's like, boy, I wish I had, been around in the 70s. I wish I'd been around in the 2000s to be a part of, the open source movement or be part of it. Well, the good news is like, you're not too late. That's the good news. The bad news is it's hard work. I think open source firmware is going to be a huge trend for all of us in the next 10 and 20 years. And if you are a younger technologist, this is a great thing. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think, Chris, you and Philip have done a terrific job of setting up a foundation that's really welcoming to those new folks. There's a lot of ways for people to get involved. So I love the fact that there were a lot of younger folks, in addition to a lot of, again, I would say gray beards, but I can't actually grow facial hair apparently. But we had a lot of older technologists, certainly more seasoned technologists, but a lot of younger ones too, which I think is great. And so there's a lot of ways to get involved. This is a very welcoming community. I think I actually like the fact that this is, I think part of the reason it's welcoming is that there's no single dominant technology here. There is people are working on, on C, on Go, on Rust, on there's some Python kind of drifting around. You got like a lot of different languages, different systems. There's not a single dominant operating system here, and I just think that makes it way more open. I feel that it's not there's not a lot of cargo culting here. People are really very pragmatic and very welcoming. So a lot to get involved with, and Philip, Christian, thank you for your hard work. I know this has probably been has felt thankless at various times, but you and 9 Elements have really served an essential and catalytic role here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us, right? And thanks for spreading the word, and supporting us. And especially also Oxide that you try to do what you can do there. So that it's great to work with people who share the same mindset and have the same goals, right? And then we can all pull it off in the end, I think. It will be nice.
I think we can too, and I think we've already made great progress. So thank you very much, and then Adam, thank you for fighting the good fight with the SSD vendors.
Making friends, yeah, absolutely.
Very good, very good. And Erwin, obviously, thank you for helping to put. I mean, everyone's got a role to play in pushing the industry forward here, and we all know this is the right thing to go do. So. I think working together, I think we can get there. And Christian, Philip, love the optimism and love the foundation. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for those of you European, joining us in the evening there, in the morning here in the Pacific. Sorry, Australia. I know it's the middle of the night for you, but it's got to be the middle of the night somewhere. So, the Perth is not here, I don't think. But
it's
all
good
right.
you are making it time compatible with Europe. Thank you for.
Well, we did it this time. Yeah. So I'm going to make no promises. I think we would like to make it. I think we're probably going to, and Adam, you and I will kind of put our heads together and we'll probably move it around a little bit, but we want to at least have some of these that are time compatible with Europe, because I know heard that a lot. People wanted to join, but obviously it's the middle of the night. So it was good to be able to do this time. And I think we'll want to do this at least somewhat regularly. Musk willing.
The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room. Yeah, we'll be next time on Mastodon Spaces. No.
That's right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Phil. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.